Xander Vex adjusted his ceremonial robes for the 5th time in as many minutes, his scales twitching irritably under the weight of his anxieties. The most important declaration in galactic history, one that could reshape the very foundation of the Confederation, was about to begin. And of course, today his molting cycle had decided to coincide with it. The timing couldn't have been worse. The Grand Senate chamber loomed ahead of him, its vast walls stretching up to a transparent dome that revealed the glittering stars of deep space. Xander's gaze shifted toward the assembly, representatives from over 3,000 sentient species, each seated in intricate patterns that spoke of millennia of interstellar politics. The amphitheater was carved from rare blue asteroid ore, the seat of power for the Galactic Confederation. And today, it would bear witness to the extinction of an entire species. He shifted uncomfortably, his frill expanding and contracting involuntarily. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You look fine, PRA," his assistant chirped. Her 4 arms were busy organizing the declaration documents, her tone devoid of sympathy. "Stop fidgeting. The Supreme Counselor is watching." Xander looked up, his eyes landing on the elevated platform where Supreme Counselor Turia Nem sat. Her 6 unblinking eyes were fixed on him, mandibles clicking in what could either be approval or a deadly threat. With arachnids, it was always difficult to tell the difference. Nothing like the threat of possible disembowelment before breakfast, Xander muttered under his breath, as his frill twitched again. "Let's focus," PRA said with a slight edge of impatience. "The declaration is about to begin." The chamber quieted as Turia raised 2 of her 8 appendages, signaling the commencement of proceedings. The amplified voice of the Supreme Counselor echoed through the chamber, magnified by the perfect acoustics. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Confederation," she began, her tone as formal as the occasion demanded, "we gather today for a solemn declaration, one without precedent in our 10,000 years of unified governance. Senior xenobiologist Xander Vex will present the findings." Xander stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. A platform beneath his feet began to lift him toward the center of the chamber, a soft hum emanating as it adjusted his height perfectly to address the Senate. The crowd before him shifted, their murmurs of curiosity rising to a quiet hum. His throat tightened. He cleared it, his frill expanding further in an involuntary reflex. Some of the aquatic delegates in the back bubbled in amusement, their deep, melodic voices filling the silence. "Distinguished representatives," he began, forcing his voice to remain steady as a holographic display materialized above him. The blue-green planet of Earth, designated Sol 3 by the Confederation, rotated slowly, its surface a tranquil mosaic of blue oceans and swirling white clouds. "For the past 50 cycles, we have monitored the species known as humans," he continued, gesturing to the image. "As you recall, this species declined our invitation to join the Confederation 2 centuries ago, choosing isolation over galactic citizenship." The display shifted, showing Earth as it had been after the Terminal War. A darkened, scarred world covered in swirling clouds of ash, radiation stains dotting the surface. The image zoomed in on what had once been bustling cities, now reduced to crumbling ruins. "We have watched, with a growing sense of regret, as their self-destructive conflict escalated," Xander's voice lowered as the reality of the situation settled in. "What we once considered a species of great potential has fallen to its own folly. Radiation spikes, the collapse of their global communications network, the eventual failure of every societal structure. Humanity has engineered its own extinction." The chamber erupted into a cacophony of reactions. High-pitched keening from the Melodians, deep rumbling from the Stonebearers, and telepathic pressure waves from the gaseous delegates filled the air. Each species, it seemed, had its own way of reacting to the news. Supreme Counselor Turia's mandibles clicked loudly, a sharp reminder to restore order. The noise died down. "Continue, Senior Xenobiologist," Turia commanded. Xander nodded, suppressing the frustration building in his chest. He gestured again, his clawed fingers manipulating the holographic controls to show images of Earth's desolate surface. No signs of life remained. Automated probes had detected no radio signals, no industrial activity, no trace of the civilization that had once thrived. "There are no organized populations," Xander continued, his voice firm. "No cities, no radio transmissions, no evidence of any surviving human life. The radiation levels in major metropolitan areas far exceed survivability thresholds for carbon-based life forms. It is my conclusion, based on the data, that humanity has met the criteria for extinction. A low murmur swept across the chamber again. The delegates exchanged whispers, some with sorrow, others with detached indifference. Xander glanced up at the Supreme Counselor, whose mandibles clicked in thoughtful consideration. "You may proceed to the vote," Turia announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "We will now vote on the official declaration of human extinction." As the chamber readied itself for the vote, Xander's eyes darted to the display one last time. Earth, now silent and still, a reminder of what had once been, a reminder of the delicate balance between hope and destruction. For a brief moment, Xander wondered what the galaxy had lost in this extinction. And whether he could truly declare it as such, knowing the potential still remained. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence as Xander's words hung in the air. His declaration of humanity's extinction had struck a chord, but the mood in the Senate was not one of sorrow. There was only cold, pragmatic acceptance. To many of the delegates, the extinction of a species was nothing more than a statistic, a footnote in the history of the galaxy. But to Xander, it was far more, a loss of potential, a tragic end to a species that had once held such promise. The Supreme Counselor's voice pierced the stillness. "We now proceed with the matter of the Earth's resources," she announced. Turia Nem's 6 compound eyes scanned the room, her voice steady, authoritative. "If the human species is indeed extinct, the Confederation must consider the ethical and legal implications of resource extraction from their world." Xander stood motionless, still processing the weight of his own words. He had just declared a species extinct, but now the Senate was shifting its focus to the matter of Earth's resources. The galaxy was no stranger to exploiting dead worlds, but this felt different. The specter of humanity's potential still lingered in the air, and for a moment, Xander struggled to reconcile it with the cold efficiency of the Senate's machinery. From the back of the chamber, the rasping voice of Delegate Quarks from the silicon-based Geode Collective rose above the rest. "How tragic," he began, his voice resonating like a bell made of crystal, "the loss of their culture. Their art, their music, irreplaceable. Yet, despite their beauty, they chose destruction. We cannot afford to romanticize them. What is lost is lost." Another voice, sharp and quick, cut through the murmur. It was General Drax from the Militant Quadrant. His armored exoskeleton clanked as he stood to address the Senate. "They were given a chance," Drax declared. "We offered them membership, and they refused. They refused to disarm their nuclear arsenals, to live in peace. This outcome was inevitable. Their violence, nearly as destructive as their extinction, was written in their genes." Xander's frill flicked in agitation. The military's perspective was always so binary, war or peace, winner or loser, survival or extinction. But there had been more to humanity than their weapons, more than their military history. He had seen the beauty of their culture, their resilience, and the stark contradiction between their destructive tendencies and their boundless creativity. "I would caution against simplifying their history, General," Xander spoke, his voice calm but firm. The Senate turned toward him, sensing the shift in tone. Yes, their violence was undeniable, but so was their capacity for compassion, for innovation. They fought wars, yes, but they also created. They reached for the stars, and they reached for peace. We cannot ignore that duality. A ripple of disagreement spread across the chamber, but Turia's voice silenced the dissent. "Enough," she commanded, her tone final. "The Council will now consider the ethical implications of allowing resource extraction from Sol 3. Xander watched as the discussions began to unfold, but his mind was elsewhere. He had been tasked with presenting facts, with offering a clear, unambiguous conclusion. Yet in this room, among the cold and calculating minds of the Confederation, his own personal connection to the human race felt out of place. He had studied them for cycles, learned from their triumphs and tragedies, and yet now it seemed as though their end would be nothing more than a resource opportunity. "Extraction could begin immediately," said the representative from the Mining Guild, a spindly creature with a gelatinous body that shimmered as it spoke. "Their planet contains vast deposits of rare minerals that would be invaluable to our industries." Confederation law requires that a planet must be free of sentient life for 100 cycles before resource extraction can begin, Xander interjected, a note of authority in his voice. This is not a matter of profit or necessity, it is a matter of legal protocol. Then we wait, said a voice from the far end of the room, the representative from the Cygnian freehold. Humanity is dead. Let us honor their passing by taking what is rightfully ours. Xander could feel the cold weight of that statement settle on his shoulders. It was as though humanity's fall had been reduced to nothing more than an opportunity, their world a barren resource mine waiting to be exploited. But they were not just resources, Xander said, his voice rising slightly as his frustration grew. Humanity, what they could have been, what they were, has value beyond what can be mined from their world. This is not just about minerals or territory, it is about what is lost in the extinction of a species. We cannot strip the earth without considering that. The murmurs grew louder, the Senate now fully engaged in the debate. Turia raised a limb, signaling for order. We will vote, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. We will vote on whether humanity's extinction is final, and on the ethical implications of Earth's resources. Xander took a step back, his mind swirling with the implications of the vote. He had come to this chamber with a clear objective, to declare humanity extinct. But now, as the voices of the Senate carried their arguments, he was left questioning his own conclusion. Had humanity truly met their end? Or had they, in some strange way, found a way to survive, even in the face of annihilation? As the vote loomed, Xander realized that the fate of the human race was far from decided. Perhaps extinction wasn't the final word after all. The debate in the chamber had reached a fever pitch. The Senate was divided, and the political tension was palpable. Xander's scientific declaration of humanity's extinction had been met with some resistance, but the majority of the Confederation's representatives seemed ready to move forward, to consign humanity to the history books as a species that had failed, a footnote in the endless chronicle of the galaxy. Xander stood at the center of the chamber, his claws tapping nervously against the podium. The conversation had turned into a familiar dance, arguments over resources, debates over legalities, and the inevitable calls for immediate action. But his mind, still grappling with the magnitude of his own conclusion, struggled to focus on the discussions at hand. Supreme Counselor Turia Nem sat high on her elevated platform, her mandibles clicking rhythmically, as if weighing the next steps. Her compound eyes were trained on the screen, reflecting the data about Earth, but her attention was now split between the delegates and Xander. It was clear that the Council was eager to resolve the matter, to take the final step in declaring humanity officially extinct, and thus clear the path for Earth's resources to be claimed. Just as Xander was about to speak again, hoping to steer the debate toward the ethical considerations he had raised earlier, the doors at the far end of the chamber suddenly slammed open with an ear-splitting bang. A low murmur swept through the Senate as a rush of security drones surged into the room, their metallic bodies gleaming under the bright lights. The atmosphere shifted, the weight of the situation suddenly changing, as the chamber grew tense with confusion. What is the meaning of this interruption? Turia demanded, rising to her full height. The motion sent a wave of energy through the room. Her venom sacs visibly pulsed under her exoskeleton, an indicator of growing frustration. Xander's heart skipped a beat as the source of the disturbance came into view. A figure strode into the chamber, confident, calm, and remarkably undeterred by the commotion. A human. She was small compared to most delegates, bipedal, and wearing a utilitarian flight suit, the fabric scuffed and worn with age. Atop her head was a mess of brown hair, and a subtle smirk tugged at the corners of her mouth. The entire chamber froze in collective disbelief. "Sorry I'm late," the woman said, her voice smooth and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "You would not believe how hard it is to find parking for a stolen Taurian cruiser." A ripple of shock cascaded across the chamber. Security drones hovered in place, unsure of how to respond. The delegates, momentarily stunned, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one had expected this. No one had considered the possibility that someone would walk into their Senate after they had already declared humanity extinct. The woman continued, unfazed by the chaos she had caused. "I understand you're discussing the extinction of my species," she said, her voice now amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "Well, I'd like to register a formal objection." seeing as I'm, not extinct. She raised an eyebrow, glancing around the room, as though waiting for the shock to wear off. Neither are the other 50 million of us who managed to escape before you conveniently stopped looking. Xander's scientific mind raced. He tried to make sense of what he was seeing. This was impossible. The human species had been wiped out decades ago, his data was clear. Earth was a dead world, its atmosphere a toxic wasteland, its cities reduced to rubble. And yet, here she was, alive and standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His scanner, ever at his belt, buzzed, confirming what his eyes refused to believe: Homo sapiens, female, approximately 30 Earth years old, alive. The human woman turned her attention to the Supreme Counselor, who was now watching her with intense scrutiny. "I'm Captain Quinn," she said, giving a slight bow, her gesture both mocking and respectful. "Formerly of the United Earth Defense Force. Currently of the refugee vessel Horizon's Promise. And you must be the big spider in charge. Love the mandibles, very intimidating." The air in the chamber felt thick with disbelief and rising tension. General Drax, ever the militant, was the first to react. His armored form rose, and his voice thundered across the chamber. "This is outrageous," he roared. "Security, seize her immediately. This is a violation of all protocol." Captain Quinn raised a hand nonchalantly, a small device glinting in her fingers. "I wouldn't do that," she said calmly. "This deadman switch I'm holding is connected to the location of our colony ships. If I'm detained, if my vital signs falter, or if this signal stops transmitting for any reason, the coordinates will automatically be erased. You will never find the survivors." A wave of silence washed over the chamber. The weight of Quinn's words settled in the minds of the delegates. She wasn't bluffing. The realization that humanity had somehow survived, that they had evaded detection for 50 years, hit the Senate with the force of a comet. Xander's thoughts spun. How had they done it? How had humanity, a species that was supposed to be extinct, remained hidden for so long? And how had this woman, this single human, managed to outwit the most advanced surveillance systems in the galaxy? Quinn turned to Xander, her eyes glinting with something like amusement. "You're the one who declared us extinct, right? I'm curious to see if you still stand by that assessment." Xander swallowed hard, his mind racing to catch up. "This is impossible," he muttered under his breath, unsure if he was speaking to himself or to the entire Senate. "Oh, I assure you," Quinn said with a wicked grin, "impossible is humanity's specialty." As the chamber buzzed with whispered questions and protests, Quinn stepped forward, her confident posture making the towering delegates look uncertain. The tables had turned. Humanity, it seemed, was not gone. It was back, and it was ready to reclaim its place among the stars. Xander, still reeling, couldn't help but feel a strange mix of awe and fear. This was no longer just a scientific discovery, it was the beginning of something far more profound. Something that would change the galaxy forever. Captain Quinn's entrance had turned the Senate chamber upside down. The shock of humanity's survival had rippled through the room, leaving delegates frozen in disbelief. But Quinn, unfazed, stood tall, exuding the kind of confidence that only a species who had survived annihilation could possess. She paced slowly in front of the Senate, her boots clicking on the metallic floor. All eyes were on her, eyes filled with curiosity, suspicion, and skepticism. Xander's mind raced as he tried to process the impossible. Humanity, declared extinct, was now standing before them, fully alive. The data, the evidence, it all screamed the opposite, yet here was this woman, Captain Quinn, alive and breathing, with 50 million more like her hidden in the far reaches of space. What kind of game is this, human? General Drax's voice cut through the silence, his deep tones brimming with distrust. He had long since abandoned the calm professionalism expected of a military leader. "If you think you can waltz in here and overturn centuries of protocol, you're gravely mistaken." Quinn didn't flinch. "I'm not here to play games, General," she replied with a sharp edge to her voice. "I'm here to set the record straight." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the chamber's energy systems. Even the gaseous delegates, usually a swirl of motion, were frozen in stillness, observing, waiting. You want to know how we survived, how humanity dodged extinction while the galaxy thought us dead? Quinn asked, turning to face the Senate, her tone laced with both pride and defiance. It's simple. We adapted. We planned for every possible scenario, including our own stupidity. Xander's mind flickered back to the data, the terminal war, the radiation spikes, the destruction. The idea that they had missed something, that humanity had managed to evade detection for half a century, was anathema to everything he knew. Yet, standing here, watching Quinn's unwavering confidence, he had to acknowledge something else. Humanity wasn't just resilient, they were resourceful beyond measure. We knew Earth would be our tomb, Quinn continued, her voice now steady. So we did what any species worth saving would do. We built ships, secret bases on moons and asteroids. We didn't wait to die, we left. The assembly shifted as the magnitude of Quinn's words set in. The Senate, for all its power, had missed something crucial. Humanity hadn't vanished into the void, they had simply gone into hiding. Turia, Quinn said, turning toward the Supreme Counselor, I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not even asking for your understanding. I'm here because the truth is, humanity still has a stake in this galaxy. We're not just some forgotten relic of a failed species. We're survivors. The Supreme Counselor's mandibles twitched, a sign of deep thought, before she spoke. You claim to have evaded detection, but our monitoring systems covered every corner of your solar system. How did you manage to stay hidden for so long? Quinn smiled, her eyes flashing with amusement. Your technology might be impressive, Counselor, but your imagination is lacking. We hid in the most unexpected places, the cometary cloud beyond Neptune, the shadows of gas giants, and tunnels beneath moons. We adapted, and we survived. The chamber buzzed with disbelief. Xander's scientific mind struggled to grasp it. How could something so simple, so effective, have been overlooked by the Confederation's most advanced surveillance systems? The idea of humanity, reduced to a small group of survivors hiding in the farthest reaches of the solar system, was as brilliant as it was audacious. You speak of survival, General Drax growled, his armored body creaking with tension, but what of your past? Your violence? Your refusal to disarm? You are the architects of your own destruction. We cannot simply let you re-enter the galactic fold without acknowledging that. Quinn's eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward, her posture still defiant. The Confederation was the one who refused to recognize our efforts to evolve. You wanted us to disarm, to strip away what made us human. And when we didn't comply, you stood by and watched us burn. But here we are, still standing. The question is, General, can you handle that? Xander could feel the air crackling with tension. The debate had turned into a test of wills, a clash of ideologies. Humanity's violent history, their refusal to conform, had led to their downfall, but it had also, paradoxically, been the driving force behind their survival. The very traits that had once doomed them had now allowed them to endure. We came to the Confederation looking for refuge, Quinn continued, her voice unwavering. We were rejected, pushed aside, and left to fend for ourselves. Now, we're back, not asking for your pity, but for your recognition. We have a fleet, we have technology, and we have a future. But we need space. We need a place to rebuild. The room was silent as Quinn's words settled in. Xander could feel the weight of history shifting. Humanity was no longer a failed species. They were something more, something dangerous, something capable of surviving the impossible. We propose, Quinn said, her voice ringing out with clarity, that the Sol system be recognized as sovereign human territory. We claim Mars, Europa, and Titan as our own. And in exchange, we offer our knowledge. Our survival strategies. Our technology. We can help the Confederation avoid the same fate that nearly consumed us. Xander's eyes widened. It wasn't just a plea for survival. It was a bold, calculated move for re-entry into the galactic fold. Humanity wasn't just asking for a second chance, they were offering something invaluable in return. The Senate was quiet now, each delegate processing the gravity of the moment. Xander, still grappling with the enormity of it all, found himself intrigued, if not captivated. Quinn's proposition wasn't just a claim, it was a declaration of humanity's resilience. They had come from the brink of extinction and now demanded a seat at the table, not as beggars, but as equals. "We will review your proposal," Supreme Counselor Turia said after a long pause, her voice measured, but her compound eyes glinting with curiosity. "However, this is unprecedented. A provisional agreement will need to be reached." Quinn nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I'll take that as a win for today." As the Senate began to murmur once again, Xander stood in silence. Humanity, it seemed, had a way of rewriting history, and for the first time in decades, he found himself eager to see what the next chapter might bring. The Senate chamber hummed with a nervous energy, the tension so thick that it felt almost tangible. The delegates from 3,000 species were murmuring among themselves, their voices rising and falling in a steady rhythm, like the crests of waves on an ocean. Xander stood at the center, still grappling with the overwhelming reality that the species he had just declared extinct was standing before him. Captain Quinn's bold claims had sent shockwaves through the room, and the arguments that followed had only intensified the chaos. Quinn, now standing at the center of the chamber, had not faltered in the face of the Senate's scrutiny. She had proposed an audacious deal. Humanity, the survivors of a species once thought lost to the universe, were claiming the Sol system as their own, asking for recognition of their territorial rights over Mars, Europa, and Titan. In exchange, they offered the Confederation valuable knowledge, technological advancements and survival strategies honed through 50 years of hiding in the shadows. Xander's eyes darted across the room, searching for some sign of agreement or dissent. The debate was already fierce. "I don't trust them," General Drax's voice boomed, heavy with accusation. "These humans think they can waltz in here and make demands? After everything they've done, everything they've caused? They should not be allowed back into the fold. We should consider them a threat." The words struck Xander like a physical blow. Drax had always been quick to see everything in terms of war, conquest, and military superiority, but this was different. Humanity wasn't a single planet's problem anymore, they were a force in the galaxy once again, and that made them a unique case. Quinn was unfazed by the general's words. "You're right about one thing, General. We've caused a lot of damage. And we've paid for it," she said, her voice steady. "But we've learned. We didn't come here for war, we came for recognition. And yes, we have demands, but they're not just for us. We've been hiding for 50 years. It's time we stop running and start rebuilding. Together." Xander's mind raced. He had seen the data, the history, the destruction. The terminal war that had nearly wiped out humanity had been a catastrophic event, one that still reverberated in his thoughts. Yet, he could no longer deny that something had changed in the way humanity had approached survival. Their survival wasn't just a testament to their physical endurance but to their ability to adapt, something that had never been accounted for in the cold, clinical studies of their downfall. "What guarantees do we have?" the representative from the Limrati Consortium asked, his high-pitched voice echoing through the chamber. "How can we be sure that humanity won't become a threat once again? They have proven themselves unpredictable. They rejected our offer for peace and now come crawling back." Quinn's eyes locked on the representative. "Guarantees?" she repeated, a sharp edge to her voice. "We can't offer guarantees, only the truth. What we've learned, we share. What we have, we offer. But we don't expect to be judged based on our past, we expect to be judged on what we can do now." Xander could feel the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just about politics or survival anymore. Humanity had returned not to beg for mercy but to stake a claim, to demand a place at the table. And in their eyes, there was no question of whether they would succeed. It was a matter of how the galaxy would adjust to the fact that the humans were back. The room grew quiet as Supreme Counselor Turia raised one of her 8 limbs, signaling for order. Her many eyes swept the room, taking in the reactions of every delegate. The hum of voices died down as she spoke, her voice calm but filled with authority. "We are witnessing a shift," she began, her mandibles clicking in thought. Humanity, once declared extinct, now seeks re-entry into the galactic community. This is unprecedented. We cannot ignore what they offer, nor can we dismiss the risks. We must consider their proposal carefully. A ripple of agreement swept through the room, but General Drax's voice cut through it, thick with disbelief. The risks are too great. We cannot simply welcome them back with open arms. What of the consequences? What of the security of our own species? We've seen the damage they've caused, how do we know it won't happen again? Xander stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. General, you speak of the past as if it defines them entirely. Yes, humanity has caused great harm, but they've also shown a remarkable capacity for survival. They didn't just survive, they adapted. They hid when the galaxy thought them dead. And now, they stand before us, not as a broken species, but as one ready to rebuild. Quinn turned to Xander, a look of appreciation crossing her face. Thank you, Xander, she said, her voice soft but firm. We're not asking for pity. We're not asking for forgiveness. We're asking for a chance to prove that we're not the same species we were when we made our mistakes. The debate continued, each delegate weighing the pros and cons of humanity's return. Xander watched, his mind struggling to keep up with the pace of the political battle unfolding before him. This wasn't about facts anymore. It was about the future. Humanity had returned, and whether the Confederation liked it or not, the galaxy would have to adapt to this new reality. After what felt like an eternity, Supreme Counselor Turia's voice broke through the noise once again. We will vote, she declared. We will vote on the provisional acceptance of humanity's proposal for territorial claims in the Sol system, and on the terms of their re-entry into the Confederation. The chamber grew quiet as delegates prepared to cast their votes. Xander watched Captain Quinn, standing at the center of the room, her eyes locked on the Senate. She had made her case, and now it was up to the galaxy to decide whether humanity would be allowed to return to the stars. Xander had no doubt that this vote would change everything. And deep down, he knew it wasn't just humanity's fate on the line. The future of the entire galaxy was about to be rewritten. The air in the Senate chamber was thick with the aftermath of the vote, the final tally still echoing in the minds of all those present. Humanity had been granted provisional status. A historic decision, but the work was far from over. Supreme Counselor Turia's voice had barely finished echoing when the room erupted into a flurry of discussions, whispers, and tentative alliances. Humanity had secured a foothold, but now came the hard part, fulfilling their promises, and convincing the galaxy they could be trusted with a second chance. Captain Quinn stood at the center of it all, unshaken by the swirling uncertainty around her. Her proposal had passed, but she knew the Confederation would not grant anything without a steep price. The Senate had agreed to her territorial claims, but only under certain conditions: strict oversight, a path to full membership within 20 cycles, and transparency regarding their military capabilities. These were not small demands, and Quinn knew full well that the Confederation's curiosity about humanity's survival tactics would only deepen as the days went on. You did it, Xander said, walking up to her. The relief in his voice was clear, but so was his curiosity. He had been moved by Quinn's unwavering confidence, but he couldn't help wondering what humanity had truly become during their years in hiding. Quinn's eyes flickered with a mix of satisfaction and wariness. Not yet, she replied, her tone careful. This is just the beginning. They'll want more, and we'll have to deliver. But for now, at least they've agreed to let us live. I'm still struggling to understand how you managed to survive all these years, Xander said, his scientific curiosity piqued. How did you evade detection for so long? Quinn glanced around the room, her expression hardening slightly as she lowered her voice. We weren't just hiding. We were learning, adapting, evolving. We had to change everything about the way we lived, the way we thought. It wasn't just about escaping, it was about surviving in a galaxy that had written us off. Xander listened intently, the scientific side of him fully engaged. Adaptation, he mused aloud. What exactly did that mean? I've seen the records. The solar system was supposed to be completely surveyed, and yet you remained undetected. You managed to remain hidden even from the most advanced monitoring systems. Quinn met his gaze, her eyes briefly flicking to the distant corner of the room where General Drax was having a heated discussion with several other delegates. You know as well as I do that no system is perfect, she said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Humans are good at finding gaps. The Confederation might have scanned the obvious places, but we didn't hide in plain sight. We hid where no one would think to look. In the gaps between the stars. The dark places. We used abandoned mining ships, repurposed space stations, and even moons that were thought to be uninhabitable. Xander's mind raced as he processed the implications of her words. And you didn't just survive. You thrived. Exactly, Quinn replied, her voice firm with conviction. We had to reinvent ourselves. Our ships weren't the sleek, fast vessels you might expect, they were old, patched-together things. But they worked. We built systems for recycling everything, from air to water to energy. We created farming methods that could survive the harshest environments. We even learned how to protect ourselves from the radiation poisoning that had consumed Earth. We became something different, something more resourceful. Xander felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no longer the humanity he had read about in his xenobiology textbooks. This was a species that had faced the brink of annihilation and emerged from the ashes, transformed. There was a raw resilience in them that even he, a trained scientist, couldn't help but admire. We don't need to be coddled, Quinn continued, her tone softening but her resolve unwavering. We need to be given the resources to rebuild. The technology we've developed over the past 50 years is ours, but we're not foolish enough to think we can do it alone. What we need now is the Confederation's cooperation. If you want peace, if you want security, you'll have to trust us. And in return, we'll share everything we've learned. Xander nodded slowly, understanding now what Quinn was truly offering. It wasn't just technological advancements, it was a new way of thinking, a new approach to survival in a galaxy that often viewed its inhabitants as expendable. He could see the potential in her words, the weight of humanity's experiences shaping their future. They had become not just survivors, but innovators, thinkers who had learned to live outside the system. We'll need to prove ourselves, Quinn said, her voice steady as she turned her gaze back to the Senate. We've made a lot of mistakes, but we're not going to repeat them. But we need room to grow. Space to expand. And you believe the Confederation will allow that? Xander asked, raising an eyebrow. Quinn's lips curved into a wry smile. They have no choice. We're not asking for permission anymore. We've earned it. As they spoke, the room began to settle. The Senate had shifted from a place of skepticism to one of cautious interest. It was clear that humanity had presented something far more valuable than resources. It had shown the Confederation that it was not a species to be dismissed lightly. But the real work had just begun. Quinn's words, however, hung in the air long after they had been spoken. We've earned it. The implications were massive. Humanity was no longer just a relic of the past. They were a force, one that had learned to adapt, to survive, and to rise. It was a new chapter for them all, one that was yet to be written. Xander watched as Quinn walked away, her confidence unwavering. Humanity had returned. And now, the galaxy would have to reckon with what that meant. The tension in the chamber was palpable. The delegates from across the galaxy were still processing the shocking events of the last few hours. Humanity, long presumed extinct, had just re-entered the galactic stage with a proposal that no one had expected. Captain Quinn had made her case with fierce determination, claiming territory in the Sol system for humanity and offering to share the technological and survival knowledge they had gained during their years of hiding. Now, the question was no longer about whether humanity could survive, but whether the Confederation would accept them back into the fold. Xander stood to the side, his thoughts still racing. The debate had been fierce, with some delegates calling for caution, others demanding more stringent oversight, and a few expressing outright hostility. General Drax had been particularly vocal in his objections, and his military tone had dominated the earlier discussions. But Xander, despite his initial skepticism, had come to see the value in humanity's offer. They weren't just asking for survival, they were offering a partnership. "We are not here to repeat history," Captain Quinn had said earlier, her eyes scanning the room, challenging every delegate who questioned her. "We are here to rewrite it. Humanity has learned from its mistakes, and we are ready to contribute to the galaxy, not just take from it." Her words had struck a chord, but the galaxy was a slow-moving machine. Even the most progressive minds in the Senate were cautious, unwilling to commit to such a monumental shift without careful consideration. Xander knew that the final decision lay with Supreme Counselor Turia, whose calm demeanor had hidden a sharp intellect that had already seen through many of the proposals presented. As the debate subsided, Turia rose from her platform, the massive, spider-like form of the arachnid leader casting a long shadow over the chamber. All eyes turned to her as she moved with calculated grace, her limbs clicking softly in the silence. Her compound eyes were trained on Captain Quinn, but the weight of the decision was clear in the air around them. "To make a decision of this magnitude," Turia began, her voice booming with authority, "we must consider not just the implications for humanity, but for the entire Confederation. We are a community of thousands of species, each with its own needs, desires, and fears. To accept humanity's proposal is to set a precedent that will affect all of us, for better or worse." The room was still. Even the gaseous delegates, who often moved like clouds in constant motion, were momentarily suspended, their attention fixed on Turia. Xander, despite his own internal conflict, couldn't help but admire the Supreme Counselor's ability to command the room with a single sentence. "To accept or reject humanity's request is not an easy decision," Turia continued, her voice unwavering. "We have seen their destruction, their refusal to integrate with the Confederation, and their violent history. Yet, we also see their resilience, their capacity for change, and the potential they hold." Xander's mind spun. This was it, the moment when everything would either fall into place or unravel completely. Humanity had made its case, but would the Confederation take the risk? Turia paused, her eyes moving from Quinn to the gathered delegates, as if weighing the thoughts of each individual in the room. "But we must also remember," Turia said, "the role of the Confederation. We were formed not just to foster peace, but to ensure the stability of the galaxy. If we allow humanity to claim the Sol system, we must ask ourselves, what does this mean for the balance of power? What does this mean for the future?" General Drax stood, his form towering over the others, his armor gleaming with authority. "What it means, Counselor, is that we risk opening the floodgates for every other species that has failed. If we accept humanity back into the fold, what prevents other species from claiming the same right to survive after their own self-destructive wars? If we allow this, we risk turning the Confederation into a sanctuary for the weak and the flawed, where survival becomes an excuse for unchecked expansion." His words hit with force, but Quinn did not flinch. "We're not asking for forgiveness," she said, her voice cutting through Drax's accusations. "We're asking for a chance. Humanity has been through the fire. We are no longer the same species that refused your offer centuries ago. We are different now, stronger." Xander couldn't help but notice the sincerity in her voice. There was no bravado, no empty promises. Humanity had survived, and in the process, had transformed, perhaps not in the ways the Confederation wanted, but they had transformed nonetheless. "To clarify," Turia interjected, her voice laced with authority. "The vote will be on the provisional acceptance of humanity's claim to the Sol system, under Confederation oversight. We will set strict conditions, military restrictions, resource management protocols, and a strict timeline for full integration. But humanity will also be required to prove themselves, to demonstrate that they are not a threat." Xander watched Captain Quinn closely as she processed Turia's words. There was no hesitation in her response. "We're not here to hide behind your protection," she said, her tone firm but respectful. "We're here to build a future. But we will do it on our terms, just as you would. And if you think you can't trust us, then give us a reason to earn that trust." The room went silent. It was clear that this was no longer just about survival. It was about humanity carving out a new place for itself in the galaxy. And the Confederation, for all its vastness, would have to decide whether it was ready to let that happen. Turia's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze turning to the assembly once more. She raised her limbs, and the chamber quieted. "Then it is settled," she said, her voice resonating with finality. "Humanity will be granted provisional status, subject to the terms I have outlined. We will proceed with caution, but we will also proceed with the understanding that the galaxy is about to change." Xander exhaled, his tension evaporating, but only slightly. Humanity had secured a foothold, but the path forward would be anything but easy. As Quinn met his gaze across the chamber, he saw something in her eyes, determination, yes, but also a glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long while, Xander allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, humanity would not only survive but thrive. The days following the Senate's decision were filled with intense negotiations, long meetings, and strategic alliances. Humanity's provisional status had been granted, but the conditions were strict. The Confederation would be watching them closely, scrutinizing every move. The new era had begun, but it was far from certain how humanity would fit into this vast, complex galactic structure. Captain Quinn stood in the heart of the Horizon's Promise, her flagship, watching as the crew of the Diaspora fleet prepared for their next steps. The ship's metal hull hummed with the energy of thousands of people working together, each focused on the future that now lay before them. They had fought for this chance, and now, as the fleet prepared to leave the shadow of their hidden colonies, Quinn felt both the weight of the responsibility and the thrill of possibility. "Captain, we've received a message from the Senate," a young officer called from behind her, interrupting her thoughts. His face was flush with anticipation, but there was a hint of caution in his voice. "It's from Supreme Counselor Turia's office. She wants us to begin talks on our military restrictions immediately." Quinn turned, her face hardening slightly. The Confederation had been clear: no military capabilities beyond their own system, at least not until they had proven themselves worthy of trust. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was a condition they had agreed to, and she would honor it, at least for now. "Put it through," she said, her voice steady, masking the frustration simmering beneath the surface. A moment later, the image of Supreme Counselor Turia appeared on the main screen, her compound eyes gleaming with the cold authority that Xander had come to expect from her. Despite the gravity of the conversation, Quinn couldn't help but notice the slight shift in Turia's posture, a subtle acknowledgement of the historic moment they were witnessing. "Captain Quinn," Turia began, her voice smooth but firm, "the Confederation has decided to begin the process of integrating humanity into the larger galactic community. However, as you are well aware, this will not be an easy transition. The military restrictions we've placed on your fleet are only the beginning. We will be closely monitoring your compliance with the terms outlined." Quinn's jaw tightened, but she held her gaze steady. "I understand, Counselor. We agreed to the terms. But I need you to understand this, too: humanity's strength isn't just in our military capabilities. It's in our ingenuity, our adaptability. We've spent 50 years surviving against the odds. We won't be bound by restrictions forever. And when the time comes, we'll be ready to prove that we're more than just survivors." Turia's eyes flickered, the silent weight of her consideration evident. "We have seen humanity's resilience. But as you know, the Confederation operates on a system of trust, not only on ability. Your species has a history of unpredictability, and trust will take time to build." Quinn nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Trust. The word had come up time and time again during the Senate sessions. It was the one thing they lacked in the eyes of the Confederation. And she understood why. Humanity had once been an isolated, unpredictable force. But they had changed. She knew that, and now it was time to show the galaxy that they had evolved. "We've never asked for your trust," Quinn said, her tone unyielding. "We've asked for a chance. We'll prove ourselves, not just to you, but to the entire galaxy." Turia remained silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she inclined her head ever so slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. "We will proceed with the discussions, Captain. But be aware, our patience has limits. Your actions will determine how far you are allowed to go." Quinn straightened, the weight of her words sinking in. "Understood. We'll follow the terms for now. But the future is ours to shape, not just for us, but for all of us. With that, the transmission ended, leaving Quinn alone with her thoughts. The burden of leadership pressed down on her shoulders. The Confederation's decision was just the beginning, and humanity's path to integration would be long and fraught with challenges. But they had made it this far. They had survived, adapted, and now it was time to prove that they could thrive. "Captain," Xander's voice came over the intercom, cutting through her contemplation. "There's something you need to see." Quinn followed the sound of his voice to the observation deck, where Xander stood, his expression thoughtful. He turned as she entered, his eyes scanning the vastness of space beyond the viewport. "I've been reviewing the data on humanity's territorial claims," he said, his voice low. "There's something important we've overlooked. If humanity is to fully integrate, there's more to consider than military restrictions or resource allocation. Your people, they've learned to survive, yes. But there's something deeper." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Xander hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've spent my career studying species, their evolution, their rise and fall. But I've never encountered anything like humanity. You've managed to evolve not just physically, but culturally. Your species' greatest strength lies in your capacity to reinvent yourselves. You're not just surviving, you're transforming." Quinn stared out into the void, her thoughts spinning. She had known, deep down, that humanity was no longer just the species that had failed before. They were something more. But hearing Xander, a xenobiologist, a scientist who had studied them from every angle, articulate it so simply made it all the more real. "You really believe we can do this?" she asked quietly. Xander met her gaze. "I don't just believe it. I see it." In that moment, Quinn realized the weight of the future was not just on her shoulders, but on the shoulders of every human who had survived. The Confederation had given them a chance, but it was what they would do with it that mattered. Humanity had spent decades surviving in the shadows. Now, they would step into the light. And together, they would show the galaxy what they had truly become. The new era had begun, and humanity would not be its passive participant. They would shape it, just as they had shaped their own survival.